How do you continue to get players to buy into or continue to be invested in a game that you have already publicly committed to drastically changing, all the while maintaining this facade of backwards compatibility? You make it as generic as possible. D&D in 2023 is going to be really, really weird. Besides my general excitement for One D&D and the things to come, there was another major reveal during the Wizards Presents live stream, and that was the 2023 roadmap. This was something we have never had before. Typically, upcoming releases are cryptically teased through incredibly vague tidbits like we are visiting a setting we haven't seen yet in 5e, or just a picture of Boo like we got from 2021's D&D Celebration. But this year was different. No subtle hints, no pieces of artwork to share, no you'll have to wait and sees, none of it. Instead, we were just given the roadmap for what D&D in 2023 is going to look like. While unexpected, to be sure, there is a fairly clear and good reason the team decided to do this. But before we can get to why, we will need to talk about the elephant in the room. Though the exact months may slip a little bit due to shipping or supply constraints, 5th edition has had a fairly consistent release cadence of about 4 to 5 books per year. 2022 saw the release of Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse, Critical Role, Call of the Netherdeep, Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, Dragons of Stormwreck Isle, and finally with Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen set to be released this December. The game, and Hasbro, Wizards' parent company, simply has far too much riding on this release schedule for it to be disrupted, and especially for the extremely transitional year that 2023 is bound to be. Then with so much to anticipate in 2024, how do you keep players interested and spending money in 2023, especially when the normal release timeline is running alongside a long-term playtest period for One D&D? I think the answer to the second part of the question is fairly straightforward. There probably actually is not all that much overlap between casual players and people actively participating in the playtest. But it's the first part of this question. How do you keep players interested in new D&D releases in 2023? That is a much more complicated question to answer, but I think the crux of it is backwards compatibility. Though I'm not naive enough to believe that One D&D is a purely altruistic move to deliver the best game possible, I'm also not cynical enough to think that it's purely a money grab either. There are aspects of the game that do need improving, and many of them are seemingly being improved. From the word go, the D&D team has clearly and consistently reiterated that everything releasing in 2024 and beyond for what is now being called One D&D will be, in no uncertain terms, backwards compatible with 5th edition. While they have been a bit cagey on exactly what that means, the most clear and direct statement we get on the matter comes from the FAQ page on the D&D Beyond website, where it says, "What does backwards compatible mean?" It means that 5th edition adventures and supplements will work in One D&D. For example, if you want to run Curse of Strahd in One D&D, that book will work with the new version of the core rulebooks. If you are enjoying this video, I would sincerely appreciate it if you would consider subscribing and clicking the like button on this video. These small gestures go a really long way to helping others find my content. I'm also inching closer to that 1,000 subscriber mark too, so thanks. I will come out straight away and say that on the face of it at least, I believe that this will be fundamentally true. I believe that you will, ostensibly at least, be able to functionally run Curse of Strahd, Lost Mine of Phandelver, Storm King's Thunder, or any other 5th edition adventure for that matter, within the new rules that One D&D creates. How good of an experience you have doing so might be a very different question. Before I get too far into the weeds on this, I really do want to give credit where it's due. Revamping an entire edition of a massive game with dozens of source books and adventures is a massively tall order, and doing so with any semblance of backwards compatibility will be a truly impressive feat. The problem that I have, and really the reason for this video, is that we are only 2 UAs in, and already the cracks are starting to form. Some One D&D backgrounds provide ability score increases, some class features are dramatically different than previous versions, and in many cases also don't line up with where the class previously received those features. Additionally, spellcasting has also been overhauled in a fairly significant way. None of these even touch on the general rule changes, like the update to the light weapon property, exhaustion, new actions, and so many more still yet to come. What all these changes, updates, modifications, whatever you want to call them, add up to is a game that has a very different power curve than it did before. And while I'm not saying that this is necessarily a good or a bad thing for the game long term, what I am saying is that it will fundamentally alter the playability of early 5e adventures as written and therefore impact the backwards compatibility of 1D&D. Sure, Curse of Strahd might work in 1D&D, but how well and how much work will it require for it to offer the same challenge? While many of the core mechanics are undoubtedly going to be sticking around, at least by name, so there will be no issue calling for them within the context of an old adventure being played in 1D&D, however, if the core functionality of that mechanic is altered, say like the new exhaustion rules, the desired result will be very different, and we don't even know how different yet. So at this point, you might be asking yourself what all this really has to do with 2023, and why I started this video off saying that the future releases will just need to be so generic. The answer is that in order to not alienate their player base, and to avoid investing millions of dollars into content that will be obsoleted within months of release, the books coming out in 2023 will need to be so far removed from the nitty-gritty mechanics of the game that they will likely lack any massive impact. Again, for clarity, I am not saying whether this is necessarily a good or a bad thing, or that it's even necessarily going to happen. It just seems very likely. How can they release a new subclass if they haven't even settled on class power or structure? How can they create new races or origins if they might be reevaluating where they sit in the game? Even the roadmap itself kind of backs up this theory. We begin the year with another anthology release, Keys from the Golden Vault. While I have no doubt that this will contain some fun one-shot or side quest material for a campaign, these tend to be rather lore and compendium light. Journeys from the Radiant Citadel, for example, only included stat blocks for 14 different monsters, added no magic items or even any new race or backgrounds, something it would have been incredibly well suited for. The second release, Bigby Presents Glory of the Giants, is likely to highly resemble Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. That is to say that it will largely be a bestiary for the various forms of giants. Context aside, I am actually pretty excited for this book. I've always been intrigued by the giant lore in D&D, so I will certainly enjoy reading this. However, while Fizbans included new subclasses, races, feats, draconic gifts, spells, and magic items, I struggle to see how Glory of the Giants will incorporate many of these. It's possible that we will see a new playable giant race, or maybe a Path of the Giant Barbarian or something, but I struggle to see how they will reconcile that with the new version of the game in parallel development. They're stuck essentially either releasing versions that are based in 5e, or they release what would essentially amount to works in progress to be 1D&D compliant. In either case, these would need updating only a few months later as development progresses. I do think it's possible that we could see some magic items, but given one of the other releases slated for the fall, I'm not really sure how many. The summer sees the release of the Phandelver campaign, an expansion to the beloved Lost Mine of Phandelver starter set adventure that launched alongside 5th edition. While in many ways this is likely just lip service to fans who wanted to continue this adventure, I think it's also unlikely that it will contain much, if anything, new. Critical Role Call of the Nether Deep contained a few items, Dragons of Stormwreck Isle contained nothing. It's great that we will get some more details of the surrounding areas, along with some new quest lines. I genuinely do think that that is exciting, but again, it may still feel a bit lacking to DMs who are eager for some new toys. Then comes the fall with the release of The Book of Many Things. I'm not really sure what to make of this quite yet. Most sourcebooks released over the last few years have been fairly light on magic items. This could have been why. An updated compendium and a trove of magical items of all sorts. As a forever DM, this sounds amazing to me. I also feel like magic items are, generally speaking, the safest things to create in the current context of D&D. We've already seen the creation of class groups, so now items can be clearly delegated to a predefined group without any issue. Additionally, much of the power of magical items is not necessarily tied to executing specific game mechanics anyway. That's kind of the uniqueness to them. Most interesting or powerful items allow a character to do something they wouldn't otherwise be able to do, so there isn't likely to be that much of a problem with simply layering these on top of any rule set. I think the final release for 2023, Planescape, is the hardest to pin down. I think publishing a campaign setting without including unique races or backgrounds or subclasses or anything crunchy would both be very difficult and probably a mistake. Perhaps, as it will be released towards the end of the year, development in One D&D could be far along enough to meaningfully include aspects of it into the published text, but for that, we'll have to wait and see. One thing that I really want to make clear is that I don't think that any of the books released in 2023 are going to be bad. I think all 5 releases will certainly contain high-quality versions of exactly what they are, which are source books released at a very awkward time in D&D's development lifecycle. So then why did the D&D team break tradition and reveal the 2023 roadmap? Honestly, I think it was an attempt to garner hype in a little bit of a different way than they have previously. People love Phandelver. Planescape is another classic setting reborn in 5e. Fizban's was generally pretty well received, so a similar book about giants should be too. And everyone always gets super excited about supplemental books like Tasha's and Xanathar's, so the Book of Many Things is sure to be a success. I think the reveal was a bit of a reassurance to both fans and the team that cool things are still happening, despite One D&D going on in the background. And sure, there's definitely some lip service going on in the shape of the Phandelver campaign and Planescape, but is that really such a bad thing if the books are any good? If you like this video, consider subscribing to my channel so you don't miss any of my One D&D coverage, and make sure to check out some of my other videos on the topic. They're linked on screen right now. Take care.